Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're taking a deep dive today into offshore wind power and its potential in Mexico. A lot of people are curious about this, and honestly, so are we. We've got a ton of research and analysis to go through, like everything from the current state of wind power in Mexico all the way to the legal and financial hurdles that they might face.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic for sure, especially since Mexico already has like a decent amount of experience with wind power, just not offshore.
Yeah. They've got over 60 operational wind farms, on land, of course,
Yeah.
producing a respectable amount of energy. But one thing that really jumped out at me was that their output is actually much lower than their total capacity, like 6,921 megawatts capacity, but only an average of 2,199.7 megawatts actually being produced back in April 2023. So that seems like kind of a missed opportunity, right?
Yeah, that's a great observation. Yeah, it speaks to some of the challenges that are like inherent in land-based wind. Grid limitations are often a factor. Sometimes the wind just isn't blowing consistently enough to reach maximum output. And then there are like the common concerns about space requirements, visual impact, noise pollution, and potential harm to birds and bats. So all these factors might be pushing Mexico to consider alternatives, like going offshore.
That makes sense. So let's shift our focus to the ocean. What's the wind potential like off the coast of Mexico? Is it even viable?
Well, the research is promising, especially for Baja California. We're seeing reports of average wind speeds around 6 meters per second, which is like ideal for generating power with turbines. Plus, with over 2,500 kilometers of coastline along both the Pacific Ocean and the Gulf of California, they've got a ton of options for placement.
Okay, so lots of wind, tons of coastline. Sounds like a recipe for success.
Yeah.
So why haven't we seen any offshore wind farms popping up in Mexico yet?
Well, there's a critical piece missing, and that is a specific legal framework for offshore wind energy. And this creates uncertainty for investors who need, a clear roadmap and regulations before committing billions of dollars to a project.
So it's a legal hurdle, but not necessarily a roadblock. I mean, they can develop those regulations if they really wanted to push ahead with offshore wind, right?
Absolutely. And it's not like there are no relevant laws at all. The federal maritime law, for example, grants the nation rights to utilize the sea for economic benefit, which would include wind power. And they've also got laws regarding, maritime navigation fees, renewable energy use, and construction in territorial waters. Even environmental impact assessments are already mandated.
So it's more like they've got all these scattered pieces of legislation, but they haven't quite put together the puzzle for offshore wind specifically.
A great analogy. And this legal uncertainty adds complexity to another major challenge, and that's financing. Building offshore wind farms is expensive. There's no way around that. Vineyard Wind 1, which is a project currently underway in the U.S., will cost an estimated $2.8 billion for 800 megawatts of capacity.
Wow, that's a huge investment. I know you're not supposed to compare apples and oranges, but for context, how does that cost stack up against other large-scale energy projects in Mexico?
Well, it's a fair question. Consider the Dos Bocas refinery, another massive project that's currently under construction. It's focused on fossil fuels, and the cost has already ballooned to over $6.5 billion. And completion is still a ways off, so it's a striking comparison for sure.
Definitely thought-provoking. On one hand, you have a costly but ultimately limited fossil fuel investment, and on the other, a potentially more expensive upfront cost for offshore wind, but with, long-term renewable benefits. Makes you wonder where Mexico's priorities lie.
It certainly does, and it leads to another crucial consideration, the potential impact on local communities, particularly those who rely on fishing.
Right. That's something we can't overlook. Their livelihoods depend on a healthy ocean. So how can Mexico ensure that offshore wind development doesn't harm these communities?
It's a valid concern, and there are ways to mitigate the negative impact, even turn it into a positive. Some developers are exploring designs for wind farm platforms that double as artificial reefs. These could provide protected breeding zones for fish, ultimately boosting fish populations and improving the overall health of the marine ecosystem.
So it's about finding those win-win solutions. Instead of just mitigating harm, they're actively creating benefits for the fishing communities and the environment. That's encouraging. But with all these challenges, legal frameworks, cost, community concerns, is offshore wind even a realistic option for Mexico?
I'd say it's more than just realistic. It has the potential to be transformative. Remember, Mexico isn't operating in a vacuum. Offshore wind is booming globally. Europe already has over 20 gigawatts of installed capacity, mostly in the North Sea, and other regions are catching up fast.
20 gigawatts. That dwarfs Mexico's current land-based wind capacity. So they're not exactly trailblazing here, but they could still ride this wave of global momentum, right?
Precisely. If they play their cards right, they could become a leader in Latin America
Okay.
and potentially even a major player on the global stage. But to do that, they need to carefully address these challenges we've been discussing.
Okay, so we've laid out the key factors, the potential, the hurdles, and the global context. Where do we go from here? What's the next step in this deep dive?
Well, let's delve deeper into the economic side of things. Offshore wind isn't just about clean energy, it's about exactly. Think about all the jobs that would be created. Not just in constructing and operating the wind farms, but in manufacturing the components, developing the technology, and all the supporting services that would, crop up around a new industry.
Right, like a ripple effect,
Yeah.
boosting other sectors of the economy as well.
Precisely. And these aren't just any jobs. They tend to be skilled, well-paying jobs in areas like engineering, manufacturing, research. This could be particularly impactful for coastal communities that often rely on industries like fishing, which are vulnerable to factors like climate change and overfishing.
So a potential win-win for the economy and those communities,
Mm.
especially if they're involved in the process from the start.
Absolutely. Engaging with local communities early and often is crucial. That's how you address concerns, ensure that the benefits are shared equitably, and build trust.
Okay, so we've got job creation, economic diversification, and community benefits. What about Mexico's energy mix? How would offshore wind fit into that?
It could be a game changer. In terms of reducing their reliance on fossil fuels, currently they're heavily dependent on natural gas, which leaves them vulnerable to price fluctuations and geopolitical uncertainties. Offshore wind would diversify their energy sources, making their supply more resilient and sustainable.
It seems like a pretty smart move, not just from an environmental perspective, but also an economic and strategic standpoint as well. But there are always challenges with large-scale infrastructure projects. What kind of hurdles would they face in terms of getting the energy from those offshore wind farms to where it's needed?
Well, that's a crucial consideration. They might need to invest heavily in upgrading their grid infrastructure. Think new transmission lines, substations, and other facilities capable of handling the increased power flow from offshore wind.
I imagine that could get pretty expensive.
It can be a significant investment, yes. But, infrastructure improvements have long-term payoffs. A modernized grid not only enhances reliability and reduces energy loss, but it also paves the way for easier integration of other renewable energy sources in the future.
So it's not just about offshore wind. It's about future-proofing their energy system for a more sustainable mix.
Exactly. And that's why a strategic approach is so important. It's about looking at the big picture, considering all the interconnected elements. But let's not shy away from potential downsides. Every energy source has its trade-offs. What are some of the challenges specific to offshore wind that Mexico would need to consider?
Well, we've already touched on the potential impact on fishing communities and the need for careful environmental assessments.
Right. It's about striking that balance between clean energy production and ecological protection. And then there are the technical challenges inherent in operating in a harsh marine environment. Saltwater is corrosive and strong winds put a lot of stress on equipment. Maintenance and durability become major factors.
So it's not just about building turbines. It's about building turbines that can withstand that constant beating from the elements.
Exactly. And let's not forget the distance factor. Offshore wind farms are offshore. Transmitting that power back to the mainland can be complex and costly, especially as you move further from the coast.
Right. The further out you go, the more challenging and expensive that infrastructure becomes. And I imagine there might be concerns about the visual impact of these massive wind farms, dotting the horizon.
Absolutely. Aesthetics can be a sensitive issue, especially in regions that rely heavily on tourism, so finding the right locations, those sweet spots that balance energy production with visual impact, will be crucial.
It sounds like there's a lot to consider, a lot of factors to weigh and balance. It's not like a simple plug-and-play solution.
No, you're absolutely right. It requires a holistic approach, carefully considering the potential impacts and making informed decisions that benefit as many stakeholders as possible, both now and in the future.
Okay, so let's say Mexico does decide to embrace offshore wind on a large scale. What would they need to do to make it a success? What are the key steps they need to take?
Well, I think they've got a solid foundation to build on. They already have experience with land-based wind, so they're not starting from scratch. They understand the technology, they've got a workforce with some transferable skills, and they've started developing those supply chains.
So they're not exactly newbies when it comes to wind energy.
Exactly. But to really become a major player in offshore wind, they need to step up their game in a few key areas.
Like what? Where should they focus their efforts?
Well, first and foremost, they need to tackle that legal ambiguity head on, creating a clear and comprehensive legal framework specifically for offshore wind. That will be crucial. It's about sending a clear signal to investors that Mexico is open for business and ready to be a reliable partner.
So it's about building confidence, establishing a clear set of rules and expectations.
Precisely. And along with that legal framework, streamlining that permitting process is key. Right now, it's a bureaucratic maze that can discourage even the most determined investors. Making it easier to navigate those regulatory hurdles would make a huge difference.
It's about reducing the red tape, making it more attractive for companies to actually invest in offshore wind in Mexico.
Exactly. And of course, we can't forget about community engagement, involving local communities, especially fishing communities, in every step of the process. That's essential. That means open communication, transparent decision-making, and a genuine effort to address concerns and share the benefits.
It's about building trust, making sure everyone feels heard and that their interests are being considered.
Precisely. And on the technical side, investment in research and development is key. That means studying their offshore wind resources in detail, identifying the best locations for wind farms, and developing innovative solutions to the unique challenges of the Mexican coastline.
So it's about being smart, about tailoring their approach to their specific circumstances and environment.
Exactly. And they also need to think about workforce development, training programs for offshore wind technicians, engineers, and other skilled workers. That'll be essential to ensure they have the expertise to build and maintain these projects.
Creating opportunities for Mexican workers to be a part of this new industry.
Absolutely. And finally, let's not forget about infrastructure. Upgrading their grid to handle that influx of power from offshore wind is crucial. That requires planning, investment, and coordination.
Wow, it sounds like they've got their work cut out for them. But you seem optimistic. Why?
Because the potential is just so enormous. Mexico has all the right ingredients to be a global leader in offshore wind. They have the resources, the location, the industrial base, a potential global market. It's an incredible opportunity.
But we also talked about Europe being ahead of the curve in offshore wind. Where does Mexico fit in globally, considering there are already, established players in the market?
That's a great question. And while Europe has indeed been the pioneer, the offshore wind landscape is changing rapidly. China is investing heavily and is now the world leader in terms of installed capacity. And the United States, as we discussed, is finally starting to catch up.
So it's a dynamic global market with lots of competition. What makes Mexico stand out? What's their unique advantage?
Well, Mexico has several key advantages. Firstly, their wind resources, particularly in the Gulf of California and off the coast of Baja California, are excellent. Strong winds, lots of coastline, and relatively low population density in those areas.
Right. Fewer people means fewer potential conflicts over land use or concerns about visual impacts.
Exactly. But here's another interesting factor. Mexico has a strong manufacturing base, particularly in the automotive industry.
Wait, cars? What do cars have to do with wind turbines?
More than you might think. A lot of the skills and technologies used in car manufacturing, like welding, metal fabrication, precision engineering, those are directly transferable to building wind turbines.
So they could leverage their existing industrial base and expertise to become a hub for wind turbine production.
Exactly. That would create jobs, boost their economy, and reduce their reliance on imported turbines. It's about building a whole new industry from the ground up.
And potentially becoming a major exporter of wind turbines, not just to Latin America, but globally.
Precisely. And as the world shifts away from fossil fuels, the countries controlling the production of clean energy technologies, they'll have a lot of leverage, both economically and geopolitically.
It's about energy security, about being a leader in a critical industry of the future.
Exactly. So Mexico has a real opportunity to be a major player on the global stage.
But if everything seems so promising, what's holding them back?
Well, besides the practical challenges we've already discussed, like the legal framework and grid upgrades, there's another factor that's often overlooked: political will.
So it's not just about the technical and economic feasibility. It's also about political decisions and priorities.
Absolutely. Making such a significant transition to a new energy system requires a strong commitment from the government, a clear vision for the future, and the willingness to make bold decisions, even if they face resistance.
And is that political will present in Mexico?
It's a mixed bag. There have been some positive signs, with the government expressing interest in renewables and setting ambitious clean energy targets. But there's also resistance from those with vested interests in the status quo. like the fossil fuel industry.
So a classic power struggle between the old and the new, between those clinging to the past and those pushing for a different future.
Exactly. And public opinion is still evolving. There's growing awareness of the need for clean energy, and offshore wind is gaining some traction. But there are also concerns about costs, environmental impacts, and the effects on existing industries, like fishing.
So a complex landscape with lots of competing interests and perspectives.
Absolutely. That's why open and honest conversations are crucial. Engaging with communities, addressing concerns, and developing plans that maximize benefits for everyone involved. Those are essential. It's not just about building wind farms, it's about building a shared vision for a more sustainable future.
And that's where I see the greatest potential for Mexico. They have the opportunity to be a model for how to transition to a clean energy economy in a way that benefits everyone.
I couldn't agree more. This is about so much more than just energy. It's about economic development, social equity, environmental responsibility, and ultimately creating a better future for Mexico and its people.
Wow, this has been an incredible deep dive. We've covered so much ground, from the technical aspects of offshore wind to the economic and political landscape in Mexico.
Yeah, it's a complex and fascinating topic with so many interconnected elements.
So what does all this mean for you, dear listener? Offshore wind power in Mexico is at a crossroads. The potential is huge, but the path forward isn't without its challenges. It's a story that's still being written, and it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds.
You know, what I find most intriguing is how this case study highlights the global challenges we face as we transition to a more sustainable future. It's a reminder that energy, economics, politics, and the environment are all inextricably linked.
And that we all have a role to play in shaping that future.
Absolutely. Whether it's supporting policies that promote clean energy, making conscious choices about our own consumption, or simply staying informed and engaged, we can all make a difference.
It's about recognizing that our individual actions, no matter how small they may seem, can contribute to a collective movement towards a brighter, more sustainable future.
Well said. And that's the message I hope you'll take away from this deep dive.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey of exploration. And thank you for sharing your expertise and insights with us. Until next time, this is The Deep Dive, signing off.